Uh, as part of our mission to being an advanced technology institution here at the University of Memphis, we do put out series such as this, which is our endeavor, which focuses on speakers from places such as energy, defense, and advanced areas such as those going forward. Today, we're very happy to welcome Ben Carmichael. Ben is part of the Advanced Energy Systems team at the Southern Company Research and Development, where he works as a business development manager to establish national and international collaborations that support Southern Company's advanced energy systems development programs. Ben focuses much of the company's advanced nuclear and hydrogen programs, and he joined the company in 2006 and has worked in a variety of opportunities across their affiliates, including engineering roles at the fleet operations, generation planning and development, managing the nuclear fuel procurement program for Southern Nuclear Operating Company, and managing new nuclear development opportunities for Southern Nuclear Development, LLC. Ben holds a bachelor's of electrical and computer engineering and a master's of science in civil engineering from Auburn University, and a master's of engineering and sustainability from University of Alabama, Birmingham, and has his professional engineering license from the state of Alabama. And so with that, we'll look forward to his talk on the decarbonation strategies for the grid scale electricity market. With that, Ben, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Remy. I realized right off I spelled decarbonization wrong on the title slide. So demerits to begin with. Nevertheless, I think we all know what we're talking about. So we'll dive in, and we won't let that be a deterrent. We know we're not trying to decarbon, but decarbonize.
Okay, I thought I had said that wrong myself, so that's why I looked. I said decarbonization, and I'm like, wait, no, that's a decarbonation. So I was like, okay, we're gonna go with that. So
it sounds more like we're trying to remove the fizz from a Dr. Pepper, but
yeah, there you go.
Reduce carbon emissions actually.
Very cool.
Okay, yeah. So nevertheless, let's move in, and I'm gonna toggle a bit so I can still see the screen for Zoom while I see the slides. My monitors aren't acting right. So just the baseline for everybody. Thanks for the introduction. I am Ben Carmichael. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, coming to you from my home office today, and give you a little bit of background on Southern Company and why it is then that we and I are interested in the future of energy. So baseline, Southern Company, you all are probably familiar with it, being in Memphis, and folks on the call with your association from Memphis, but we are traditionally affiliated with the regulated electric utilities in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, or some of those: Georgia Power, Alabama Power, and Mississippi Power companies. We also have a wholesale energy affiliate. Southern Power operates all across the U.S. We have a natural gas company, has 4 local distribution companies and some stakes in midstream pipeline assets. We own the leading custom developer of microgrid solutions in the U.S., an affiliate named PowerSecure. And we've got some other cats and dogs, including our nuclear fleet operating company. That is a shared service company that operates the nuclear plants that are owned by Alabama Power and Georgia Power. We are building close to finishing the 2 new nuclear greenfield light water sites in the U.S. First in 30 years. TVA did finish some that they had started a couple decades ago in last decade, but as far as new greenfield, we're finishing the first with Vogtle units 3 and 4 just here in the next several months. In this map, you can see the assets around the country. We have quite a renewable portfolio, especially through our affiliate Southern Power. Then you see sort of the stats there, and we serve a lot of folks. Okay, and then just a real quick visual of how our companies line up, stack up the different affiliates, regulated, unregulated, or non-regulated, gas companies, and then some of the other subsidiaries. So we don't want to dwell on this, but I just wanted to point out some company highlights. our generation mix, as it's been trending over the last, say, 15 years from really a peak coal usage at the end of the decade of the 2000s, where coal would have been much more dominant than natural gas. You can see where that fuel switch has led us. Through the end of 2020, nuclear really remains steady at source of energy. These are energy numbers. At about a sixth of the fleet. Capacity is just a shade more than that, but basically capacity and energy about the same. And we're certainly growing that renewable portfolio. An interesting statistic is that in Georgia, I think the number is by 2025, we will have something like, of the capacity in Georgia, 40% of that capacity in Georgia will be carbon free, either between mostly solar and then nuclear resources. And that's without any sort of mandate to do that. So it's all voluntary. That's pretty remarkable. Just to illustrate that Southern has a full suite, a full complement of things that we're looking at with the future of energy, just a couple quick things and some visuals playing in really a lot of space that's heavy infrastructure, things that decarbonize our existing infrastructure, like carbon capture, with its ability to do, to decarbonize, take a lot of carbon on the existing fossil fleet, and gas assets, certainly deploying a lot of renewable energy across our affiliates and the new nuclear, as I talked about a second ago. We still want to keep a focus on new nuclear's role in our fleet. Energy efficiency, demand side resources, distributed resources are all important to us. I think they've got a real role. And we really take the strategy of energy, future of energy seriously, and environmental responsibility seriously, which leads to this slide. We do have a net zero by 2050 goal. We'll dance on either side of it for the next couple of years, this 50% reduction by 2030, but we're virtually there. And we know it's going to take additional technology work to get to 2050 and that net zero goal. But we do believe we can do it. And some of the things we'll talk about in just a second do lead to that future. R&D is a big focus of the company. We've been a business unit for over 50 years, billions of dollars invested, leveraged for high returns on environmental controls, future energy projects, things like that. We've got right now, even just singularly in our nuclear program, more than $250 million of advanced nuclear projects being cost shared with the Department of Energy and the nuclear office right now. So lots of dollars flowing to research and charting the future energy market. So I'm going to, let's see, let me talk for a second. So we can't back out of. Okay, stop sharing for a second, just talk. We'll come back to those slides. So I want to say a little bit after talking about Southern Company and what's the role for, or how do we decarbonize the electricity grid, electricity markets, and then, by extension, the economy more pervasively, and how can electricity and the electricity grid be a backbone for doing those things? And we certainly have a lot of infrastructure tied up in the electric utility, lots of transmission and distribution, a lot of generating assets. And really, these things really enable our modern way of life. Energy has, it's certainly been a big part of modern life for 100, 200 years as we progressed from wood to coal to town gas, natural gas. Nuclear has been in the mix, and we increasingly incorporate energy into all facets in every corner of our life, and we can see that just in the connectivity of all of our appliances. And so, as carbon became a central part of the energy mix in advancing that modern way of life, but has led to the scenario we are with the imperative to decarbonize. We have a tension of how do we preserve that modern way of life, building upon the energy density of the fuels, the carrier fuels that we have now, and knowing that energy density probably increases over time, yet extracting the carbon from the atmosphere, from the environment. And so I'm going to posit to you a couple of things as a baseline for our discussion. And I do want this to be a discussion. So if you've got questions, post them up in the chat. I've got it open here. I'll try to answer those questions in real time as we go through. I know y'all may not be able to talk, but at least chat, type a question and ask me, and I'll try to answer it. And if we can open it up later, certainly that'd be great. But couple hypotheses for the future of energy. One, electricity is fundamental. We've built the transmission and distribution infrastructure. We need to continue to leverage that. It is true, at least I believe it's true, that it's going to be harder and harder to continue to build out additional linear infrastructure, horizontal infrastructure, so pipes and wires. We need to preserve what we have, increase the capacity of what we have, leverage it, find places where it's underutilized, where capacity may not be at its fullest, and put things on the distribution system to leverage that. Make two-way flows, increase the ability for electricity to be a decarbonization tool in transportation through pervasive support of the EV charging infrastructure, personal vehicles as EVs, mass transit, electrification of mass transit, and electrifying industry where we can. We, Southern Company, have spent a lot of time working with our customers to electrify where possible, but we know that you can't electrify everything. So a couple of great examples are heavy haul transportation, Class 8 trucks. The time needed to turn around a charge versus the downtime of not having that freight in motion versus the range begs for, a different solution than just solely EV in Class 8 trucks. Cement, making cement, needing that high temperature combustion for in the kiln for clinker production, things like that. High temperature for reheat or for reduction of iron in the steelmaking process. It's hard to electrify a high heat solution like that. So we need something combustible. Probably hydrogen. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But the low hanging fruit is electrification. We can get out there and we can electrify as much as we can, then we're well on our way. So then the next thing is, and you could sort of grade this out along with a process heat rubric. Electrification, sort of a low process heat, and so a low process heat industrials, you can electrify those things. The next tranche up, call it, say maybe, in fact, I've got a slide on this, maybe I'll go ahead and pop that up. Okay.
Hey, Ben, it looks like we've got 2 questions already. Do you want to go ahead and take them, or do you want to wait until a little later?
Oh, yeah, let's go ahead and take them. Okay. Although I can't see them for whatever
reason. No worries.
Because I got the chat up and not the Q&A.
Yeah. So looks like the
first
question says, what other challenges do you see in reducing carbon emissions?
So I think the first is just the pervasiveness of which we use carbon-based fossil fuels in really powering our way of life. And that's hard to extract, right? We're creatures of habit, we're creatures of convenience, and the infrastructure is really built around those things. So there's the first question of infrastructure and moving away from that. I mean, I just said we should go for electrifying everything we can. And that's because, my perspective, we've already got a T&D infrastructure there, and it's easy to build off of that to go electrify, to pull out the use of carbon-based fossil fuels in those applications. But closely coupled, but secondary, and maybe of more importance, is the economic proposition. because all of these things are built, at sunk cost. It's there. Nobody wants to go retool and spend the capital to retool their process if they don't have to. And then, oftentimes, as is the case with hydrogen, we'll talk more about this in a second, as we, even with the DOE's programs that Congress has promulgated through bipartisan infrastructure law and tax credits that we expect to see from the IRA, the value proposition of hydrogen is high, but the cost is high as well. And balancing those two out so you can get that hydrogen as an energy carrier molecule moving into transportation and industrial markets and grow those markets to decarbonize, to get off the fossil fuel. That's a huge proposition. We've certainly got a lot of companies around the U.S. and then international companies. Europe's probably a step ahead of us, who have some pretty robust decarbonization goals. But at the end of the day, these folks do have to remain going entities, and their costs and economic measures are a huge part of that. So, it's hard to go throw the dollars at things that don't make sense, don't pencil out economically against the incumbent fuel sources. So we've got to find ways to grow that over time, to expand the supply chain such that costs can come down, while we help folks understand how they're incorporating those new energy carriers into their processes. So hopefully that makes sense, but I think those are they're a couple, but sort of the two biggest hurdles in decarbonization.
Sorry, I was muted. That was a very detailed response. Thanks. And it looks like the second question here is talking about some of the local issues going on here between our local electric utilities company, MLGW, Memphis Light Gas Water, about them considering leaving TVA and joining MISO. Do you know if Southern is interested in entering traditional TVA coverage zones? Could Southern partner with MLGW to build more renewable energy if they joined the MISO?
Yeah, I think that this is going to sound, very motherhood and apple pie, spirit of camaraderie, but we've got a great relationship with TVA. I know that there have been a lot of things going on with the Memphis utility and TVA, and I know they're not all settled, and I'm not following it as closely as some of my colleagues, some of my compatriots at TVA are. But I think what I would say then in response to that is we're serving where we're serving, and we're probably not going to see the lines of service redrawn, and nobody's really actively lobbying for that. If Memphis breaks away from TVA, that could be a different story as far as who's providing power. But that's not a conversation for today. What is interesting is the collaboration that we continue to have on a lot of these advanced energy systems with neighbor utilities, with munis and co-ops and city utilities, to figure out how we can put this new infrastructure in place and how we can collectively develop these markets. So hydrogen, I'm going to talk a lot about hydrogen over the next now 40 minutes or so, because I'm doing a lot of work on hydrogen with the Hydrogen Hub. And in developing the hydrogen ecosystem, as the DOE, I think, is really intending it as they've written the Hydrogen Hub program, they're looking for a spirit of collaboration, cooperation, to put all the use cases, to incubate the use cases such that hydrogen grows from just a commodity molecule with a use case most prevalent around Houston and the Gulf Coast for petrochem, to expand into the transportation markets, the other industrial applications, so that we can use it as a decarbonization tool. That market's got a long way to go to grow. We can all see that. I think the technology is well understood, both on the production and the use case, but it's got to be incorporated commercially. It's got to be integrated commercially. And there is, even in the Southeast Hydrogen Hub team that we're a part of, TVA is a part of it, Duke, Dominion, Louisville Gas Electric, Kentucky Utilities is a part of. I think it's really a tremendous level of collaboration to look for these new solutions that, one, will promote decarbonization, will help us meet our decarbonization goals as the other utilities, and two, because we are all utilities with a mandate to serve in our territories, and there's pros and cons to everything, but I think overall I like our track record and all of our track record for serving. We're looking for solutions that bring the most value to the customers.
Right.
And through this collaboration and cooperation, we're focused on that. How do we keep energy costs a value, a good economic proposition for folks who live in the area, work in the area, businesses who want to relocate to the area, all of those things. So I'm not sure that directly answered the question of what are the opportunities ahead for Memphis, but I think some of those things probably have to play out before Southern would wade into anything quite candidly.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, very detailed answer. Thank you for the questions. We'll continue
Yeah,
on.
yeah. I appreciate the questions. Thanks for flagging me. So I mentioned, I think you can sort of bucket these three things that I'm about to say by process heat. And I put up a graphic. Hopefully you can see this. The OECD published this thing, and you can see this sort of slope of processes and their temperatures of process heat that they require. And so anything sort of 500 C or less is probably a good candidate for electrification. Okay, 500 C or less, that's probably about right. I'm not a chemical engineer, as Jeremy said earlier, so forgive me if I miss some specifics of where processes start and where they end, at least temperature-wise. That next tranche, though, are really good candidates for a high temperature process heat that's generated by advanced nuclear. So we talked about the fact that I'm involved with both our advanced nuclear and hydrogen programs in a large way right now. Touch on a number of the different programs within our R&D organization, but these two are really big ones. And I think that there's a real complement between hydrogen and advanced nuclear. I think we need and we should expect that nuclear plays a large role in the decarbonization of the United States by providing that baseload electron around the clock. Renewables, all stripes of renewables are going to have a huge role to play. But even now, we see that there are challenges with scale, even as we're adding lots and lots of renewable capacity to the electricity grid. We really need a good baseload resource without the carbon attached to it. Nuclear is going to fill that. I would also tell you, I think naturally we're going to get some, if you don't ask it out loud, you're probably saying to yourself, well, nuclear, that's not safe. We're not building them because they're not safe, things like that. I would, this is a separate conversation, but I would posit to you that we're not building more nuclear because of the cost. It's not because it's not safe. We can handle the technology challenges. There is a question about, does battery storage have a place to handle baseload? I think it does. However, I think we're going to find that scalability of batteries is also a challenge. We're already talking about projections of rare earths into the existing battery supply chain. I do think we'll see some advancements that move away to some different materials, but even from a land use perspective, and the same reasons that horizontal infrastructure, linear infrastructure, pipes, wires are going to be harder to permit in the future, I think land use is going to continue to become more of a challenge. So if we think about acres and acres of particularly solar and then battery farms, I think we might end up having a challenge. Then, there are some technological limitations of, just conventional batteries. If we have large, some more advanced forms of storage, I think that's possibly a solution, but I think we're going to also find that there is a scale issue that we still need if we want to couple it with solar predominantly, but renewables. We're going to have a lot of scale issue with building out the renewable projects. So they'll continue to play, I do believe, but I think we've only begun to scratch the surface of the scale, the challenges with scale, and then integrating them onto the electricity grid over time. Feel free to post up some more chat or Q&A if that's an unsatisfying answer. But that's informed in a large way by some of the challenges that I've seen having been in our fleet operations organization and just thinking about scale and some of the challenges associated with scale of those programs. So if I think about then nuclear's role in this next tranche, if we organize this by heat, advanced nuclear reactors can provide a high temperature process heat from that 500 to 1,000 degrees Celsius range. As you get up higher in that range, it's fewer and fewer reactor types that can do that. But these are likely to be viable solutions, certainly in the next decade, providing that high temperature process heat. These advanced reactors, they're not water cooled reactors, but maybe salt cooled reactors specifically, can provide that high temperature process heat and a much simpler plant design, much simpler safety proposition as far as just equipment, cheaper cost as a result, an ability to locate a lot closer to population and industrial centers. And we've already seen some of this even as the NRC has permitted the Clinch River site that TVA has over there by Oak Ridge. We'll be able to couple advanced nuclear with these higher temperature process heat applications in the future. Along that note, question on what's the opinion on small modular reactor technology. And in many ways, I'm really talking about that. Let's bifurcate that. We hear SMRs, small modular reactors, tossed around, and sometimes they refer to a conventional light water reactor that's just a smaller size. So to illustrate, we, Southern Company, are building Vogtle units 3 and 4, as I mentioned earlier. They are 2 Westinghouse AP1000 units. They are roughly around 1,200 megawatts gross output, big machines. And there are a number of small modular reactor, conventional light water reactor designs that are in the couple hundred megawatt range. Any engineer would probably, or economist would probably put up an argument that, okay, you've got a cost problem with new nuclear as it is. Why are you going to build it smaller and lose economies of scale? And interestingly enough, in nuclear, it turns out you've kind of got a perverse relationship of economies of scale. Once you get really big, you have to introduce more powered and active safety systems than you would if you were a smaller unit and just relied on laws of physics, natural phenomena to cool the reactor should you need to shut it down. So you have to have less pumps, valves, active equipment to operate the plant on a smaller plant. So you're able to whittle some costs out. You should be able to reduce the regulatory burden of getting that thing licensed as well. Also accelerating the timeline to licensing, which is our real cost driver in addition. So there's that small modular reactor. Some people are talking about light waters. I like those. I think those are really good concepts. 2 of the leading ones are the NuScale reactor, and GE, General Electric, has the BWRX-300, which is an evolution of their conventional boiling water, light water reactor technology, just in a smaller package. I think it has a real cost proposition. People may be talking about advanced reactors, generation 4, as it were, small modular reactors. So these are maybe the salt-cooled reactors that I talked about just a moment ago that offer the ability to put a much higher temperature steam out for process heat, have the even more simple safety scenarios because of these different cooling mediums. These are really classes of reactors that we've known about for decades, but we have just in the last couple of decades, really since the 2000s, had such increases in computing power, so therefore the modeling, the mod sim, evaluation scenarios, things like that, and material science advancements, that even though we've known about these technologies for years, and a molten salt reactor as a class of reactor is really the poster child for this. We've known about it. We've operated these on experimental bases, but some of these limitations in computing firepower and material science meant that we had a way to go before they would be really commercial. We've got those advancements now. So for instance, we, Southern Company, are working with developer TerraPower on one of their reactor designs. We call it the molten chloride fast reactor, or they call it the molten chloride fast reactor. This is as a class of technology. This is a technology that Lou is very familiar with, and we think it's got tremendous promise from cost proposition, but it's got just a bit longer lead time to being commercialized, because we're just now able to take advantage of these different technological advancements. So we think that thing will be commercial middle part of next decade, but it's generally thought of as a smaller reactor, modular in the sense that a lot of the systems will be built at a factory, put on a skid, assembled at the site. So it has all the characteristics of something that's smaller and more modular than we're talking about today. And there's a number of different advanced technologies that fit in the same boat. So just as a caution or a point of clarification, an SMR might refer to either of those classes. Both are going to be smaller, both are going to have some advantages. You really need the advanced reactors to get to the second tranche to unlock these process heat, high temperature process heat applications that I'm making reference to. And we should expect that cost proposition to be a lot better, and the schedule to build be a lot better. And if nuclear is going to be part of our future, we need to build lots of new nuclear units, not just to displace the fossil generation that currently exists as it retires, but to absorb all of the new demand that just is growing by leaps and bounds. So we've got a lot of work for building nuclear plants, if this is indeed the solution, as at least I'm advocating that it is. So if I look back at this slide, I've now got two tranches: one that you can electrify, one that you're going to go after with high temperature process heat. And then the third, let's call it anything over this 1,000 degrees Celsius, you still need some sort of combustible. And that's really where hydrogen comes into play, in my mind, at least in industry. Transportation, certainly a lot of applications for hydrogen. Ag, I think y'all have already had as a series speaker, some folks talk about sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. I know a lot of it tends away from, just ammonia-based fertilization, but NH3 is going to continue to play a big role, and we want green hydrogen to be a part of that. But nevertheless, in industry, you really need hydrogen for steel making, for cement, for paper making, for the kilns and pulp and paper mills. And that's where you need hydrogen to play. That's interesting because there's a couple places for hydrogen. Hydrogen is made by steam methane reforming almost exclusively now. There's a couple electrolyzers in play, maybe more than a couple, but in the aggregate, it's small scale as far as the production of hydrogen goes. You would ideally like to move away from a fossil source producing hydrogen. Now that said, steam methane reforming with carbon capture and sequestration is a solution. And we do think that that's going to play. We've done a lot of work in carbon capture. I think we are, as far as the utility goes, really leading the pack in that expertise. We are interested in deploying carbon capture solutions, and I think you'll see more of that going forward. It is a tool to preserve the infrastructure on natural gas plants for steam methane reformers for making hydrogen if hydrogen grows. And if you need a big quantity of hydrogen right now, steam methane reforming with carbon capture is the way to go. There's just not enough electrolyzer supply chain capacity to meet that demand. So we do see that playing, and we talked about infrastructure earlier and the needing to leverage that infrastructure. Carbon capture really helps in that. But all the same, over time, you'd really like to trend away from just combustion of fossil resources. Oil, petroleum derivatives are going to continue to play for products. And we will see more, we'll see hydrogen continue to be used in those processes, but it will green up over time. Ultimately, and this is going to be decades, you'd really like to see your hydrogen produced electrolytically from either an electron off of a nuclear reactor or using a solid oxide electrolyzer cell and the high temperature heat to go produce that hydrogen molecule. And if you start to assemble those things in that fashion, and you've got the transportation world that's coupled through either electrification of non-high duty cycle vehicles or passenger vehicles, and then hydrogen for high duty cycle vehicles, long range vehicles, and you've stepped through this electrification, process heat, hydrogen scenario, I think that is the real objective, or can be a real objective, maybe not but can be a real objective and a real path for moving forward for decarbonization on a really big scale. Again, that's undergirded by the electricity grid. You're going to move those electrons around, and then you're going to develop out probably a close coupled infrastructure or process heat for producing the hydrogen, and the process heat to the industries as well that those advanced nuclear reactors will serve. So I want to paint that vision to you, and then come back to a second larger tenet that I guess I've really hit on. I said I had three larger tenets. I've really hit on about two of them. One is this sequential electrification as a solution, or generation of with advanced nuclear as a solution for electricity, process heat, and hydrogen. I talked about nuclear being baseload and renewables playing a role, but really being limited by scale of solution. And the third thing that I really want to mention to you is the role of carbon in the future. And this is titled decarbonization. And we've been talking about pulling carbon out of the economy. But I would suggest to you, we don't really want to pull carbon out of the economy. Carbon needs to continue to play a role. Think about all of the places that carbon shows up in our daily life. I mean, I'm just looking around me at my desk right now, my computer, even my desktop here. All the plastics, the synthetic materials in my room around me, I'm wearing some of it right now. We need carbon. We need carbon for plastics. In some places, we're going to want to keep a hydrocarbon fuel. So synthetic drop-in fuels made from a carbon and hydrogen. We synthesize the things. Jet is probably the place where that makes the most sense, because you just need that sort of energy density in a hydrocarbon. Feedstock chemicals for some basic proteins, things like that. I think proteins, right? As I said earlier, I'm not a chemical engineer, so some of the chemical feedstocks elude me. But you want carbon. You want to continue to use carbon because it's essential to our way of life. That said, we need a net neutral source of carbon. Where are we going to derive the carbon molecule in a way that's responsible and sustainable? We got a couple solutions for that, at least in the toolkit right now. I'm sure we'll come up with some new things. Ideally, as I said earlier, if you're synthesizing a hydrocarbon and you're putting the C and the H together, you don't want to do something that is like a steam methane reforming with a carbon capture that you then make hydrogen to go recombine with a carbon. That seems pretty bizarre. That doesn't make a lot of sense. You want to be able to electrolytically produce hydrogen from a decarbonized electron and pair it with a net neutral carbon resource, biogenic being sort of the top thing. So in the Southeast, we've got a great pulp and paper industry, a great biogenic resource that's already being captured, aggregated, and concentrated. If we can harness that stream from pulp and paper plants, which is a net neutral resource, and synthetically combine it with a green hydrogen or a drop-in fuel, we've closed that carbon cycle. The next thing is really direct air capture. That's costly. We need a lot of energy. And the concentration of carbon in the air just begs that it's going to be a more expensive proposition. So you're going to want to hit these resources that are these biogenic resources primarily, or other streams. And there's some low-hanging things like even carbon that comes off of the brewing process in beer. That you'll want to tap these things first before you go to DAC. You'll probably need nuclear plants to power the DAC just because of the size of the things, and to be able to capture the amount of carbon from the atmosphere that you want to link up to a green hydrogen for synthetic aviation fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, for those chemical molecules that go into plastics. Methanol is a platform chemical, things like that. So that's the third point I want to make, that we don't really want to decarbonize. We want to decarbonize the electricity grid. We really don't want to decarbonize the economy. We want to recarbonize the economy. We want to come up with a sustainable, net neutral source of carbon. And in the meantime, just thinking about what our concentrations are of CO2 in the atmosphere, sequestration is going to have to play a role. We know we're going to have to capture and sequester, probably use DAC to capture and sequester, just so we can get those concentrations back down to those levels that scientists say are more sustainable for the planet. But in the long run, we want to be getting the carbon out of the atmosphere, either through natural sequestration through trees and biomass that we're then unlocking, putting back out in the atmosphere to then capture through that chain, or using a direct air capture, going to product, if it's a consumable product, putting it back in the atmosphere to capture again, and you've got that sort of virtuous cycle. There also is a path that would say that durable goods, plastics that are not to be consumed, can be a path for storage, ultimate permanent sequestration of carbon. And it may even lead you to a place where you are capturing carbon that to help pull out of the atmosphere to bring your concentrations down, and you're putting into those plastics for a variety of consumer goods as a path for ultimate sequestration and disposition. So, third thing, summary, we need to recarbonize. Remy, I know you said earlier I probably should talk for about 30, 40 minutes. I'm now about 45 minutes, and then take questions. Certainly we've had some questions along the way, but I better quit talking since I've really got my couple points out that I wanted to stress and bring out food for thought here. And, if we can open up for questions, if you have questions, if others have questions, love to entertain them.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple more questions. The first one here, it says, do you think battery storage has a place to handle base load?
Yeah, I hope I got that answered sort of in line. I did see that question. So batteries will play, but I do think there is a scale issue and land use, both for batteries and then the renewable resources that ultimately you'd want to pair with them. I think we're going to have a challenge for, for scale ultimately.
Great, thanks. And then another question, the second question here is, what's your opinion on SMR, small modular reactor technology?
Yeah, I hope I got that answered in line too. I saw that there too. Talked about the two different types of, people might refer to two different types of technologies when they say SMR. It sort of gets batted around. So it could be a conventional light water reactor or an advanced reactor. Both are smaller. Both actually should, in a perverse economies of scale way, be a more cost-effective proposition. And I think a lot of both light water small modular reactor technologies and certainly advanced reactor small modular reactor technologies, even microreactors. They're not going to be the ubiquitous solution, but microreactors are going to play a role in certain areas where the cost of power is super high, places where you're trucking in diesel on an ice road, for instance, or in real mission critical applications where you want to have a secure fuel source for multiple years, for instance, and your demand for that critical resource is a couple megawatts versus a couple hundred megawatts. So
Very cool.
yeah, I think SMRs are a great tool.
All right, great. Lou has requested to make a comment. I'm going to go ahead and allow Lou to chime in here.
Awesome.
Lou, you are. There you go.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, let me try to lower my hand. It's distracting. Well, thanks, Ben. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I had a question for you from early in your talk where you talked about the concerns about additional horizontal infrastructure development. And I think we see that certainly in the state of Tennessee, we need some natural gas over on the east side, those mountains are problematic. But when you look at the service area for Southern, do you think you're going to be challenged in getting more gas and more electricity to the more rural areas? And are there concerns that that's going to limit their potential for additional manufacturing jobs and economy growth and population increases?
I think there's a couple perspectives on that. One, just if you take it in the aggregate and beefing up, putting new routes into place to some of those rural areas, I think that's going to be a challenge. In many cases, I think that the right-of-ways can support, some additional conductoring, larger conductors, and we'll be able to move power there. Pipes might be a different story, but nevertheless, I think there's some headroom in some of the existing right-of-ways and easements. But I also think that there's a real tremendous opportunity in the distributed infrastructure. And this has a lot of resiliency and even a globalization type of implication. If we are able at the end of the distribution system, so think about you're somewhere in rural Alabama or rural Tennessee, and you're a small town at the end of the distribution system. Your capacity factor on your wires coming in might be 50% in general. So you've got some headroom to put some more industry in. But what you really might want to do is have some local generation through, maybe you've got a good water resource and you're able, as the cost of electrolyzers come down, maybe you're able to generate some hydrogen in a cost-effective manner by piping in using the additional capacity on your wires. You'll put in some energy storage via the hydrogen that's there. You're able to use that in transportation and maybe other capacities. Maybe you're able to maybe you're in rural Alabama and you've got a biogenic CO2 resource, and you're able to make some of these synthetic hydrocarbons that go into play. Use the transportation networks to get that out and distribute it. I think that there are some real opportunities in some of these underrepresented and underserved areas as a result of these new energy carriers that may just not be intuitively obvious. I also think that and hope that some of the small modular reactors will be able to locate. And I know if permitting horizontal infrastructure is hard, permitting new nuclear is going to be hard too. But nevertheless, maybe there's some opportunities as we're able to site these things closer to population centers, as just the safety case is more easily understood, as the cost is better, that those areas can have just sort of a new avenue for electrons and process heat on a cost-effective way that opens them up for industrial production, commercial production that serves a smaller geographic footprint. You're not distributing those goods to the world. Maybe it makes the value proposition of a smaller factory serving a local geographical context more palatable. And I said, you know, it has sort of a globalization or maybe a deglobalization implication to it. I think it does. Certainly, we're seeing a lot of reasons to move away from globalization just for resiliency and a security perspective. And I think we can really find an answer for a lot of our communities in this future of energy. So that's a long answer to your question. I went in a number of different directions, but hopefully there was a semblance of something that makes sense there and some of the opportunities that I think are possible.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I appreciate the perspective. We spent a long time centralizing things, and now it may be time to look at how we kind of decentralize some of them too. So I think that's a really good approach. Thank you.
Yeah, you make a good point. We have spent a lot of time centralizing things, and I don't think that goes away because you know, a lot of the centralization is really serving the urban areas, which are certainly going to continue to grow. So I don't think we'll lose the opportunity to utilize that infrastructure.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Nice talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thanks. And while we were talking just then, I see there's two more questions in the Q&A. Tennessee seems to be doing good in the race to reduce carbon. What can the state do better? I tell you what, I like some things I hear from TVA about investigating new nuclear, about investigating opportunities for places to sequester carbon in geology around your state. I think you've got a number of companies headquartered in the state that are thinking about, I mean, I just think about like Pilot in Knoxville, thinking about the future of energy carriers for the fleets that they serve. It seems like you've got a pretty good ecosystem and a lot of thought leadership, to use a buzzword, in thinking about how to tie all these elements together in a cohesive manner to decarbonize. What could you do better? I don't think this is a particular thing to Tennessee. I think this is everywhere. So this is the answer as much for us in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi it is for y'all. I think that people don't understand the value proposition that comes with decarbonization. There's a lot of opportunity, even as Lou asked a question about, you know, our rural communities, how can they be better served through this energy transition? There is real opportunity there, and figuring out how we leverage this evolution to benefit ourselves through economic development. We've got a strong case in the Southeast to be an industrial powerhouse for a lot of native reasons in the race to decarbonize. You know, exploring those things and making sure that everybody understands, you know, there's a lot of positives here, and we shouldn't just be concerned that our way of life is going to change as a result of decarbonization, and nor should we think that we're just going to spend out the nose for energy. At the end of the day, we might spend a little more for energy as a result of this, but there's a lot of benefits that accrue to us as well. Just even with, you know, environmental outcomes that are real positives, and it's just sort of reframing our lens for, you know, what's good for us versus what's bad for us. And then lastly, this last question: what can local Memphians do to politically? Oh goodness, let me look back at the answer because I didn't catch all of it. What can local Memphians do politically to ensure that we aren't left behind in decarbonization? You know, probably don't live in Memphis, right? And I just know a little bit of your struggles. I think making sure that you're well represented and you're participating in the process. Decarbonization, as we sort of alluded to, has many facets. There's many avenues for the evolution of energy in decarbonization, and it includes things even like the built environment. So, you know, transportation infrastructure, your neighborhood infrastructure, taking part in the process, being sure that you can you can make sure your voices are heard. There are probably avenues to do that. Maybe there should be more. I don't know. But I think that's the thing to do. Just get informed. And I'm sure everybody on this call, on this seminar, is informed. Make sure your fellow citizens are informed and participate in the process. That's probably the easiest thing to do. It sounds trite, but I think that's the easiest thing to do. Not that it's easy, but step one.
Great. It looks like one more question from one of our guests. We'll use this as a final question for today. It says, Ben, do you see any possibility of direct air capture at scale in the Mid-South area?
Definitely. I think we're probably a ways away from that, just on the economic viability, and it does need a lot of power. So we probably need to build out some generating assets to be able to power it. But nevertheless, I think it's viable here first. I think that we are in a great place to utilize that carbon, closing that carbon cycle for synthetic hydrocarbons and industries around here that'll use it. We probably have some of the best environments for constructively coming together to build resources. Notwithstanding, they'll be harder here too than, just as, but it'd probably be more constructive to build here than it will be, say, in New York or Ohio. So I do see a real opportunity for direct air capture. The DOE's got the DAC funding opportunity out there right now. I think our utilities are thinking about, how we take advantage of that and what's the right places for us to participate or follow progress. I don't think any decisions have been made about where to go with that, but we're certainly looking at that. And that'll be a part of the ingredient in figuring out, what's the right timeline to deploy direct air capture in the Mid-South, in the Southeast, and, what's sort of the right structure and business model to do it.
Great. Well, I think with that being said, we'll go ahead and end our talk here. Thank you, Ben, so much for everything today. This was a wonderful, wonderful session. And for those who are here, we will be recording a posting of this talk on our FIT web pages, so please be on the lookout for that. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and end today's session. Ben, thank you so much again. Appreciate everything, and we look forward to welcoming everyone back for a future session.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben. Good seeing you.
Thanks, Lou.
Yeah, you too, Lou. Talk
All right.
soon.
See you guys soon.
Thanks.